Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for making it out this morning, especially if you went to the Berachain party last night. How was it, first of all?
Honestly, I don't remember. No, it was good. It was good. It was a good time.
Okay, very cool. So we're going to be talking about alt L1s or layer ones, maybe in this era, and do we really need more? With me, I have Smokey, co-founder of Berachain, Xinshu, Chief Strategy Officer at Babylon, and Howard, co-founder of Provable, which is the devco for Alio. So to start things out, so first of all, do you guys want to provide anything else in terms of your introduction? And then we'll get into the chains themselves.
Can maybe do like one-liners, like super quick, just
please.
that way. Yeah. Berachain, EVM identical L1, powered by proof of liquidity, allows us to turn liquidity into security and use it to power the applications building on top of the chain.
Babylon is a two-sided marketplace. It attracts Bitcoins to be staked and use that to secure different consumer chains and layer 2s.
Alio is a new ZKL1. The idea is to support private smart contracts as well as public code as usual. Offers on-chain finality, off-chain executions, enables private dexes, games with information asymmetry like Battleship, also ZKML, so being able to run computations that take much longer than what a block time typically could allow for on-chain.
Great, thank you. And I'm Stuti. I'm a partner at Kraken Ventures. So first question. With established L1s like Ethereum and Solana already thriving, why do you believe there's still a need for yet another L1? Can you describe your chain and why we need it in this landscape?
Yeah, I think that there's 100% L1s that have gotten a meaningful amount of adoption. I think it's fair to say that Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I know Bitcoin isn't as much of a base plate, but still an L1 in its own right. I think it's fair to think of them as like defaults, right, where people go to build. But I think it's also arguable that there still isn't an L1, or there isn't an L1 that has actually produced applications or produced something that's reached mass adoption. I think that we've gotten to some things like, people might have Phantom downloaded on their phone. They might play with shitcoins on pump.fun, right? You might have some people that have Uniswap if, they're really thinking about crypto on a meaningful basis, or perhaps OpenSea for a brief period of time. But I think that what has been missing a lot at the application layer, I should say at the chain layer, is something that actually supports the applications that are built on top of it. I believe that right now, with the exception of sort of like the masses of capital and or the communities that have been formed and the developer ecosystems, all of which I believe are relatively flexible and fungible, I don't think that Ethereum or Solana necessarily does anything for the applications building on top of it. One can argue that there's a foundation and grants programs and yada, 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 but I don't think that there's something within the chain's actual mechanism of action, if you will, or the chain's actual operation that is built towards supporting those applications. And when I think about Berachain, I think on one hand, we unlock a meaningful degree of capital efficiency in allowing the liquidity that's living on the network to contribute to its security as well, which can be accomplished in other manners too, but in a more roundabout way. I think we really do this at the base plate. And perhaps most importantly, it means that for the chain, as the chain is generating emissions, as the chain is inflating, as blocks are being produced, those aren't just going to the validator sets, and those aren't solely going to a subset of users who are staking tokens. Those are going to people who are actively contributing liquidity and value to the ecosystem and the network. So really we see it as the first chain that actually has been purpose-built from the ground up to drive value to the application layer in hopes of actually driving the most value to users at the end of the day. So a perfect world for Berachain is one where it actually means that we can decrease the barrier to takeoff, and we can decrease the activation energy required to actually make it as a new application, whether that be bootstrapping liquidity for a token, whether that be incentivizing certain actions using proof of liquidity, or whether that simply be building an application that actually has the ability to tap into the chain that it's building on. So sorry, a little bit long-winded, but that's sort of how we really think of it.
I think I can share some interesting observations because Babylon as a project itself is really not focused on launching its own L1. We may launch an L1 for some of the utility reasons, but our purpose is really to connect different chains to Bitcoin, the oldest chain. Right? I think for me, we can think about different reasons why people want a new L1, but I just have to say, let's be honest to ourselves. People love launching L1s. It's something that nobody can stop. It's like people like traveling. They want to explore different countries, different cities. People in our blockchain space just love to launch L1. Maybe they are new projects. They want to position themselves as L1. Maybe they are existing project. They have done some kind of applications, but then at some point they want to have their own chain, so they have their own autonomy, right? Like Babylon currently has to actually pick and choose which particular tech stack we can support in terms of security integration, but we have spoken to various kinds of tech stacks, ranging from, let's say, Cosmos SDK to Substrate, to EVM or EVM fork, and then to different rollups, Arbitrum, OP stack, right? The fact that we have so many different tech stacks means that people like to explore. They like to explore technology. They like to explore different chains that may be tailored to different kinds of applications, as Smokey mentioned, right? So even sometimes when we speak to certain chains that are really, really focused on applications, let's say NFTs, entertainment, their CTO may be like a particular enthusiast on certain very specific tech stacks, right? So I just feel like the natural interest in exploring different chains and different architectures is there, and as industry players, we will just have to support it.
Yeah, I would actually add to what Smoke and Xinshu had to say there. Like, I think that L1s fundamentally have different capabilities, and I think that that is one of the most important deciding factors of whether it makes sense to even go and have one. Like, when we were building Aleo, one of the first thoughts was basically to say, what is the kind of dilemma or the problem that we're really solving for? And there's really two axes we looked at, which was programmability and privacy. And you could say, like, if you say programmability on the x-axis, privacy on the y-axis, you have Bitcoin in this bottom left corner where it's low programmability, it's low privacy. As you know, it's pseudo-anonymous. There's no smart contracting language in there. And Ethereum took it and said, well, let's give it high programmability, meaning, let's give it smart contracts. But it was still pseudo-anonymous. You're kind of gated by your account address. And Zcash went the other direction and said, let's extend Bitcoin and offer high privacy. And on that level there, it basically offered no programmability, but it gave you the full ability to have hiding of the sender, of the receiver, and of the amounts. And we said, well, let's kind of try to solve for the upper right-hand quadrant of high programmability and high privacy. And this is why, like, this idea for private smart contracts was born there, to enable a new capability. And the question you may say is, well, did you need it to be an L1, or could you have made it like an L2, or just some type of network that was based on some other ecosystem? And the short answer is yes and no. We tried for a while actually to try to put this onto Ethereum at the time. And one of the main challenges was there's a lot of friction to adding new opcodes, as you can imagine. But also what's more difficult about a chain like Aleo is that if you want to have something that has privacy, you have to really start with a network that's private by default, and then work your way back into something that can be more public disclosure, right? And starting with a chain that is public by default, it's much harder to offer that type of information asymmetry out the gate. And so in a case like this, it makes a lot of sense to have it be its own dedicated standalone network. But I would say that this isn't always the case, right? Like, there's many L1s that are derivatives of existing types of chains that offer different properties, and it's arguable whether you would want that, or certainly from my point of view, it's arguable whether it's necessary. But if you're looking at fundamentally trying to offer a new capability or a new architecture or a new way of moving transactions, then I think that it's still very well warranted to date.
And actually, an extension of what you said, like, how would you say competing with other L1s is versus Ethereum L2s, since that is a big part of the current meta?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, from my perspective, I think that if you're going to make a new L1 and it's going to have different capabilities, it should be complementary to other tech, and like that's where the bridges become useful. For instance, if you want to have the ability for a game like Battleship on chain, and you need to hide the opponent's board in order to play the game to make it interesting, you can't build that feasibly on Ethereum without using advanced techniques like a commit and reveal scheme, and that hurts the UI UX in a journey like that. In this particular instance, then it's very complementary tech to that. Granted, you could also say, well, I could just go build existing types of dApps on a L1 like this, sure, but what's the point? Because you have the network effects already on those chains, and that's kind of to your point about the L2 question. I think that there are very strong network effects that are very valuable to gather and to garner, and that's where even for new L1s, certainly, from my vantage point, building products and services on this network, it's thinking about how do I bridge to existing chains like an Ethereum, like a Bitcoin, like a Solana, because you still need to have that value and the ability for developers to interact with that type of programmable money. But I think that the L2s are running into a separate issue, which is the fragmentation of the ecosystem, right? And liquidity fragmentation becomes more of a challenge there. And so, I think that every design choice has its trade-offs. Some are better, some are worse, but you kind of pick and choose what you're willing to tolerate and accept, and then kind of try from there.
Yeah. And you guys are all crypto OGs, so you kind of know how the cycles work. Every cycle there are new L1s that come up, and they feel really real in the moment. Like, think back to EOS or IOTA. Do you think that attitudes towards these alternative L1s has changed over time, and is it different in this cycle?
Yeah, this time's definitely different. No, I'm like half sarcastic on that one. I think actually people are kind of tired of the infrastructure grift. I don't think that L1s have been the biggest, recipient of that criticism as of yet. I think it's actually been more with the many copy-paste L2s that have like a little tweak here or there, or some like buzzword sandwich, but no actual use cases or no actual builders. I think that the L1s, I think it'll come for L1s as well, as in I think that if there's a lack of substance, then I think that people will have reason to take issue with that, and that they'll have reason to think that it's just cooked like the L1s of the past. But I also do think that perhaps relatively uniquely, it seems that this class of L1s has been meaningfully more thoughtful about what it takes to survive in a market like this, where there's just been so much trash dumped on the public.
And what does it take to survive in a market like this?
I think that you need to take a radically new approach. I think that in the past, a lot of the L1 playbook was we're going to spin out this technology from a leading institution or a leading firm, we're going to install a team around it, and then we're going to try to make people care, right? But it's all about the tech first. I think that some of this L1 cycle, or some of the cycle is about the tech. I think a lot more people are starting to get to the point where they're like, what about the actual user? What about actually having distribution? What about actually having people who want to use my network at the end of the day? Because we can't keep on PvPing the same group of 20,000 people on crypto Twitter, right? That ultimately ends in a death spiral and isn't very sustainable as a flywheel. So I don't think that chains can also take that laissez-faire approach to building. They can't just say if they build it, they'll come. I think now L1s and some L2s have gotten smarter and have said, hey, we need to make sure there's a real ecosystem here. We need to make sure that we're thinking a lot about how we build a brand, how we get this in the hands of users, and how we actually have a few apps here that someone cares about. So I think that a lot of folks have realized that a lot of infrastructure was not well priced, and I think that may be a realization that we all have again in the future. But I do expect to see a transfer of value to the application layer, and rationally so. Because infrastructure has always been a greater fool's bet. I say this ironically as someone building an infrastructure project that I believe is very application focused, right? In that it's always a bet that someone's going to come and build something on top of that, and that B2B2C network is going to cause massive multipliers. And it's rational for VCs because you hit one Solana that didn't look like it quite made sense in 2017, and you made it, right? And there's one or two of these meaningful outcomes every cycle, like you said. So why would VCs stop betting on L1s, right? But I think that if we continue to see this downward performance trend, as I think we've started to see since 2018, 2019 at least, in terms of just L1s having any substance, then yeah, I think it's rational for the market to react accordingly and send them to zero.
I think it's a very interesting question. I think a lot has changed. I can just share two aspects from my experience. So when we were building Zilliqa, the first sharding chain back in 2017, people were excited about it because it was dubbed as the Ethereum killer. Howard was excited about it. Howard invested in us. So now if you think about it, right, at that time, you almost need to be positioned as killing some other projects for you to get some attention. I think at least that has changed now, right? You don't have to kill anyone. You can just be yet another interesting chain. Maybe you're interesting technologically, maybe you're interesting from an application perspective, maybe you're interesting because the founders can just bring a lot of users on chain, right? So I think that has changed. The second part is that at that time, very few projects could build legitimate chains because the mode was just so high. The technical mode was just so high. Like I remember I wrote, from scratch, and it's a prototype of Zilliqa from the first line. But nowadays we have many different tools, many different SDKs. You can just focus on like how do you make this a successful business rather than being too bogged down into, how do I like implement this feature or that feature. I think these are very big changes from 2017, 2018 to now.
So, do you think that we've gone from like a 2017 this killer L1 Chad meta to a 2024, virgin L1 Kumbaya interoperability meta?
I think so, and I love it. I don't think we should kill each other. What's the point, right? Like, we're still very new. We should leave some space for different chains to coexist and interoperate with each other.
Yeah, I would also just add, like, if you look at the end token holder today, they are not so fanatical that they, say it's do or die by one, right? Like, they are now participants in multiple ecosystems, and unlike in the 2017 era, I think what's really evolved is the governance story as well. There's now much better social coordination layers than what was there back in the day. We now have, formalized platforms where you can go and vote with your tokens, with stake. Staking itself has become more of a prevalent idea and common idea, whereas at the time it was still quite evolutionary or revolutionary kind of to begin. And I think that those two facts of users being kind of multi-chain, multi-asset holders and supportive of different ecosystems alongside just better social governance and coordination now, I think it makes it so that it's a very different type of storyline and narrative that is being created.
I would actually take the under on that one. I think that, it might seem more kumbaya nowadays and more like, oh, we're all homies. I think that's entirely false. I think that the ecosystem is still highly PvP. I think capital is probably more mercenary than ever before. I think there's more creative approaches to how to attract users and capital. And I don't think I can call points creative, but there's been metagames that have evolved, right? But I still believe that at the end of the day, it is not WAGMI in the slightest. I think that very few people will actually win. I think that there are some groups that will be, at the center of a number of different things and help enable a lot of different winners. But I think that most teams will fail. We can totally fail, like, highly self-aware of that. But I think that subscribing to this belief that, I think people just say, like, we're going to be X killer less because a lot of the killers didn't really kill anything, right? So it just, like, ends up being, like, bad branding, right? But a lot of people say, oh, Monad's going to be a Solana killer, right? I don't know what the fuck they say Berachain's going to be like. But if you actually study what I would say are some of the most successful L1s, and I think that kind of controversial here, but I think that, like, Cardano and Tron have actually done some of the best jobs of building L1s that have lasted for different reasons. Cardano is just an unholy cult of community, but if you ask someone who holds Cardano if they hold anything else, a lot of times it's no, it's fuck you, I live and die by ADA. And I actually think that's been incredibly resistant over time. Now, not everyone has the luxury or the, whatever you want to call it, of having an Ethereum founder on board or, Charles Hoskinson meditating in a pool, but, like, that's a thing. And not everyone has Justin Sun and USDT and, like, those endless resources on the other side. But I think a lot of the L1s that have succeeded, even if you looked at Terra in the past, right, which was actually quite impressive on an ecosystem side beyond horrible tokenomics that were, that did not end well. A lot of these created very insular ecosystems, and they built groups that only cared about what they had, right? And I don't think that necessarily models the behavior that we see in Web 2 in many cases. Like, you don't see someone saying, oh, I will only use Uber, fuck Lyft, like, all my homies hate Lyft, right? But I do think that crypto naturally draws, like, cult-like or very, like embrazened behavior. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to extend on this. Like, what are some learnings, good and bad, that you have picked up from other L1s, such as Ethereum, Solana, or Cardano, for example?
I would say I didn't want to hog the mic too much.
Yeah.
So the good and bad from other L1s?
Yeah.
I think I remember back in the days, Bitcoin was a very closed ecosystem. It's basically very difficult to do anything, to talk about anything. People were just very argumentative. They were not open-minded. And Ethereum was a very open kind of ecosystem. They were embracing all sorts of suggestions, new technologies, new ideas. I think things have shifted, if I may, over the years. maybe by different groups of people in the ecosystems. I think for what I have heard over the years, there's a new wave of Bitcoin ecosystem projects, probably not by the same people, but new people have joined this ecosystem. Now Bitcoin is very open-ended. You can do anything. You can try different experiments, and people are more tolerant. While on the other hand, for Ethereum, now it seems to be more like legitimacy, alignment, talking, all these sort of things, right? So I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I think it's a very interesting change. While from my personal perspective, I feel like the whole space is a very early stage. We should always be open-minded, try to embrace different ideas, like this Terra thing. Like people have different views. I was a friend of Do. I still feel it's a very interesting experiment. I feel he has good intentions in his heart. Execution went wrong, things went wrong. But I feel like having a very free money on chain, it's an interesting experiment. We should just, we should create an environment that's like going to be conducive to more experiments like that, right? So that's just my view.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, like, with the difference has been, as Xinshu mentioned, the barrier to entry of building a new chain has gone down significantly over the last, call it 6 years. And I think because of that, you now have also new market opportunities for projects that are literally just to build support into existing users. Like wallets these days are becoming more multi-chain now. They're also becoming more multi-L2s. And I think that is a huge shift in terms of like the mental model for new people coming into crypto, especially new developers, because they don't, at least from my experience, they don't seem to me like they are wedded or locked into any one ecosystem. I think for people that I know from, call it 7, 8, 9 years ago, like it's a very different type of approach. But I see that people like build on multiple chains and they reason about these assets and gas fees on these chains because they want to move assets across them, or they see market opportunities to arbitrage or to trade across them. And like, to me, like I think that's a good thing. It's an interesting thing, and I think to Smokey's point, many of these will probably fail, and that's normal. This is crypto. It's a social experiment at the end of the day. But I think that the user themselves also recognizes that, and that's why they're willing to play the multiple ecosystems.
I think that one of the things that has become most obvious is that in order for a L1 or a decentralized organization of some sort to progress, you do need some form of leadership, right? I think it's very easy to see groups just fall apart or into a state of disarray, and a lack of, like a state of stasis, I suppose, with over decentralization. And to be clear, I'm very much an advocate for decentralization, but there still needs to be product, there still needs to be a mission, there still needs to be some force that is driving that in some particular direction. I think that like it's become like kind of Lindy to make fun of ETH recently for this, right? But I do believe there's some truth in it, right? In that there's a very audacious and a very meaningful vision set out, a lot of which became less and less accessible over time, though it had, I think, or it has very like noble like end goals, right? Around scalability, around security, around actually ensuring that one can scale Ethereum for the masses. But I don't think that they've been a product-focused organization, if you can say organization here, right? I don't think Ethereum has been a product-focused experiment. I think that Solana, on the other hand, very much has been, right? Like there's a constant driver, a constant set of very core people who are pushing Solana to be a better experience for users everywhere. So I think certain L1s have taught me that it's important to not lose the plot and remember that no matter how interesting and no matter how much you can nerd snipe a few people at the technology you build, if end users don't want it, and if you don't solve a real problem, make something people want, insert YC slogan here, like no one cares, right? I think the other thing that has definitely, been an easy lesson, I kind of mentioned this before, is just that there is no substitute for doing the work of building an ecosystem and being very thoughtful about curation. And I think that the L1s, the chains in general that have seen greater degrees of success are those that have very much made themselves a home to interesting new applications. I don't think people want to go to a chain and see the same, 3 versions of Uniswap and Aave and Lido there. I think people want to go to a new chain and find applications that they've never experienced before that are ideally meaningfully enabled by that chain. So yeah, I think that would be a mini grab pack of things that have come across those ages. And I guess that the last thing is sort of like what I mentioned earlier, is that like community is incredibly, incredibly important for an On one hand, the community determines sentiment, and that has effects on price action, yada, yada, yada. But the community is also the home of any network effects when it comes to builders, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to people who actually will push the product forward, right? And it's very important, I guess, to have like clear comms / like a real like sense of trust with that community, because I think then you'll have people who are with you through the good times and the bad, right? And I think that a lot of the chains that have sort of basically stood the test of time all had some massive horrible event, right? Like Bitcoin had Mt. Gox, Ethereum had the DAO hack, Solana had FTX. Like everyone had some time where they got punched in the face, but as a result of having a stalwart enough community, dev group, whatever that might be, they were able to persist. And I think that becomes, very difficult to manufacture, and actually ends up being a lot more action-driven and a lot more time-driven.
Yeah, I definitely want to spend a bit more time on, how you approach community shortly. Before we get there, what is something that you like and dislike around each other's approach to L1s?
Among the 3 projects here?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. I think my main complaint on Alio is I haven't seen Howard for so many years. He's just so bogged down by the development. He's not out of his hiding. But now I think he has come out of that eventually. So
It's all about shipping.
yeah, all about shipping. Yeah, but community is important, right? Yeah, we should have more interaction. But I really like their approach of like just really engineering focused. Doesn't care about what's the hype in the crypto cycles and deliver the product. And now they are probably one of the most successful projects in ZK. I think that's just super interesting. And maybe for Berachain, I just like the bears, I think that's, they have so many, very cute videos. Someone is explaining how Berachain works, how do you do this DeFi thing, and then you have these cute bears walking around. I don't know, I just feel I really like it, and there's nothing I dislike about Berachain so far.
Wow.
Thank you.
I think one thing that Smokey mentioned really I would feel very strongly about is just you need to have very good leadership if you're going to make a project like really take off or really get a crowd, a cult following behind it. I've seen so many projects die by the words of we're handing it to the community to decide, or we're handing it off to the community. Like this is, in my opinion, a recipe for disaster. Like I think it's important to have the community opine, to contribute, to chime in. But I think there's 2 facts that people recognize in the space who are developers. One is they realize that without a central quote unquote group of people that are actually leading the charge and pushing for the actual network upgrades to convince the validators or the miners to adopt and accept the changes, I don't think you can actually have a good social coordination layer that's successful. And I think the second point that people also tend to almost undervalue from the outside is just how difficult it is to land a new feature or to implement a new feature that is well tested, well audited, and reliable for all the different edge cases that these complex networks can support. I think that it's a very nuanced set of people who are typically the core devs, and there's probably less than 20 people in an ecosystem of thousands who actually can reason on the deepest level about what the implication of this design change will do. And I think that is something that you need strong technical leadership and you need strong social leadership to actually make a change happen or to make an evolution to a protocol happen. And I think that is an area that for a very good roadmap to happen needs some really hard-headed, iron fist people.
Okay, I would say that I think that, the part that I was surprised about was like, Howard, you're a very well-spoken dude, and you have, I think, done a great job of even explaining Elio and what you guys are building on this panel like right now. I actually wasn't aware about you guys for a little while, and it's interesting because you've raised money from great funds. You have what sounds like a very interesting solution. So I think my only qualm would be that, and maybe this is just because you guys have been actually focusing on product/shipping, which I have a lot of respect for. I just it feels like mindshare wise there's work that could be done, and perhaps that's a timing thing. Perhaps it's like, hey, mainnet comes up and then just absolutely pop off. That would be my only criticism. But from everything else I've heard, it sounds pretty dope. And Xinshu, I'm obviously a big fan of the Babylon team. I'm an investor, full disclosure, and I have a lot of good friends who are very close to the ecosystem and who work there now. In fact, one of the first people who was there with us from like day one when Berachain was founded is now the head of strategy at Babylon, and I have infinite love for them. I think the only qualm that I would think about there is that I think that people don't care about security. I think that many people, I think that's like the black pill, right? I think that actually we're seeing this to some extent be distributed, like, seen in the eigenlayer ecosystem. I think there's a very different opportunity that maybe could be the thing that isn't said out loud as much, which is that there's a opportunity to have like 0 to 1 moment for yield on Bitcoin. And I think that will be game changing. I think that will be a massive breakthrough to be able to have, an opportunity to, in a very safe manner, earn from the most, the largest and most plentiful cryptocurrency in existence at the moment. And I think that there are meaningful security benefits as well. And I think there's a certain group of people that'll really care about that. But I also imagine that, perhaps depending on legal, et cetera, in a world where you guys are really able to evangelize, like we are going to be the 0 to 1 moment for people to actually make their Bitcoin productive. I think that will go absolute gangbusters. So I hope that those are, balanced and rational comments.
Yeah, thank you.
I would just say one last thing, which is more memes, please.
So back to community. So in the Ethereum community right now, alignment has been a really big topic. Like, what do you believe are actually these catalysts for conversations coming up around L1 alignment in the first place?
When you say alignment here, right? Like, do you mean
like Ethereum alignment topics?
Sure. I think Ethereum alignment's a meme. As in, I think people just said that a lot of times to be like, oh, like ETH is everything. But I think I'd say over the last 3 or 4 months, the Ethereum alignment narrative has like fallen off pretty hard, and that I don't think as many people are trying to like talk about how Ethereum aligned they are. I think a lot of people are like kind of on the Solana bandwagon now, which is like not a bad thing, to be clear. But I just think the concept as a whole is like whack. It's like, what does it mean to be Ethereum aligned? Like, okay, are you using the EVM? Are you building an ETH-L2? Are you like close to the core devs? Like, I think the concept is so like amorphous that it ends up meaning nothing. It ends up being a buzzword, right? And I think that there's every cycle there's a couple things that get said a lot, but mean very little. I think I'd put modularity in that bucket from like this cycle. I do think the modularity has like utility and actually is a somewhat useful thing, but I think the majority of people who talk about modularity don't actually know what modularity means. And they're just like, this sounds like a good word. So I think that I think ETH alignment's a joke. I think the alignment thing as a whole has just like kind of gone too far. And it's like, I think it's perhaps somewhat derivative or perhaps somewhat downstream of like, these like EAC type movements in the Valley and whatnot, where it's like, okay, subscribe to this cult of like accelerationism or X alignment, et cetera.
So do you think that Ethereum alignment is a good or a bad meme for Ethereum?
That's a good question. I think it'll ultimately end up being bad. I think it'll cause a culture of toxic self-selection into either being ETH aligned or not. And if you're not ETH aligned, then you're not at the cool kids table. You can't roll them. You don't have the ETH blessing, whatever that might be. And I think that it could end up being a marker of a more problematic marker long term. I think that Ethereum and the EVM are wonderful. I just don't think that the term ETH alignment is necessary.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Smokey. I think alignment as a general term is important, right? When we collaborate, we have to align interests, right? Things like that. That's important. But then I think the current way we are approaching, or the general community is approaching alignment is oversimplified, right? They feel like we can just keep talking about it because it's a good word, because it's a meme, and then it will work. And then there are certain practices of like forcing alignment across different projects, and the ecosystem also attracted, backfire, right? So I think we're at a juncture where we should really rethink about how do we approach alignment. So for example, if we are doing a project, even if it's in the Ethereum ecosystem, what does it mean to really benefit the users and the community members there, right? When we're doing another project, does it mean that we have to find some chain to align to, some L1 to align to? If that's the case, then nobody can launch any new L1, right? Because you cannot have alignment in that case because you are new. I think really, I don't think the purpose is to align our project with other projects. The purpose is really like, what's the value add? What's the benefit of bringing to the existing ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the alignment aspect itself is harmful for creativity and harmful for expanding what is programmable money. Like, this is a new technology that's supposed to enable you to do new things. But I think one of the biggest challenges right now is we're not seeing ETH alignment per se. I would call it ETH piggybacking. It's almost like piggybacking off of your parents' credit score when you're growing up. That, you know, every project today says they're ETH aligned, but what do? They quickly go off and build their own community off of it, and you know, just drain it of resources there. And I think that this is, you know, this is in and of itself not a good or bad thing, but I think what's toxic about it is that you adopt the same culture and the same way of thinking, and it doesn't change that. I mean, if you go look at, you know, the Bitcoin community, and, you know, I'm not going to put my own opinions on it, but like, it's a very different culture than, say, Ethereum's, right? And I think, like, especially, I will say, from Alio's perspective, the culture of the community is extremely different. The developers think much more regulatorily or much more compliantly because you have this intrinsic ZK component to it. And like, even thinking about bridges to Ethereum or to a Solana, there's constantly this thought about, well, you know, how much should I tolerate? How much of a time lock should I be considering? How much should I be accepting of assets? What types of assets and under what circumstances? You know, there's much more of a direct kind of regulatory aspect of the thought process. Also, it's a project that's US based versus a Swiss or Singapore based project, right? And so, like, the mentality, the cultural shift, I think there is different. And Alio is certainly an example of an ecosystem, in my opinion, that has not been strongly ETH aligned from the get-go. And so, you know, from my perspective, I strongly believe it's important to have organically developers try from their own perspective to build something that is their own ecosystem or their own definition of a blockchain ecosystem.
What do you think alignment is going to mean to your communities? Like, you know, what will you do when people start tweeting about Berachain alignment or Alio alignment or Babylon/Bitcoin alignment?
Probably just meme the fuck out of it. Like, I think I'll just probably make fun of it, to be honest. One idea that we had toyed with at some point that I think is a little bit more interesting, but like can still be corny, is we thought about this idea of like app layer alignment, right? Because I do think that Berachain is one of the only ecosystems, in my opinion, perhaps the only ecosystem where the chain is really, really aligned with the applications, and its function is to help power them, to help decrease their customer acquisition costs, to increase their capital efficiency, to make their lives easier. So, you know, I can perhaps see something around that happening. If you know, people start building this sort of Bera alignment narrative, I would probably try to redirect it a little bit and say, like, you know, Bear alignment can be one of many things. It can be having a Bear-themed project, which is, you know, very common in the ecosystem. It can be having really shitty branding like we do by just adding B to the start of a number of different things. Our first testnet was Ardio. Our second testnet was Bardio. We've been doing a tour across Asia called the Beera's Tour, like a ripoff of like Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. Like I think stuff like that. I think of that as almost like cultural subscription, right? And I don't think that's the worst thing, as long as it's not, as long as it doesn't feel like it's mandated. If it feels like something where, hey, it's opt-in, it's fun, do your thing, then yeah, I don't think alignment's that toxic. But if it becomes something where it's a us versus them, like, oh, we're aligned and you're not, then I think that you have to squash that ASAP.
I don't think we want Babylon to be the focus of alignment, right? We don't need Babylon alignment. We want the alignment to be focused on Bitcoin or blockchain or in math we trust, right? So I think that's our objective. Babylon is bringing new utility, new use cases to Bitcoin. You know, that's, you know, the direction. We hope people will use Bitcoin more, have more belief in Bitcoin and the rest of the blockchain ecosystems.
Yeah, I would say to the extent that there is any concept of ETH alignment, I think it's really understanding of the fact that there's liquidity there, and that's interesting. It's the network effects component. But I think for us, you know, the thing that's been the biggest aspect that we chime in on the governance front is ZK itself. ZK is a new technology. It's been a very emergent thing. We've only seen a few use cases in Ethereum and in blockchains of ZK, and it's primarily for rollups or ZK EVMs and the scaling the discussions there. I think that that is only one narrow facet. Like ZK itself means zero knowledge, and like none of these chains are using that technology for zero knowledge itself. I think that they're using it for the computational integrity component. But you know, I think from an alignment standpoint, it's really towards what this new technology can unlock or what its capabilities are. And a lot of the language discussions that we talk about in evolving Leo, the programming language here, is about like what new ZK capabilities do we want to add into it, and how could it be complementary to other blockchains out there.
Okay, so for this last round, I'm going to say a word, and then I want each of you to say whether it is overrated or underrated. So, you know, we can start, you know, Smokey, Xinshu, Howard, like go in this order, okay? First word, Memes.
Underrated.
Neutral.
This is crypto, underrated.
ZK.
Overrated.
Underrated.
Underrated on certain aspects, overrated on the marketing.
Vitalik.
Overrated.
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 Satoshi.
Underrated.
I really don't know.
Neutral, but not Craig Wright, please.
Gas fees.
Overrated.
Overrated.
Yeah, overrated.
Interoperability.
Underrated.
Underrated.
Very underrated.
Airdrops.
Fuck. Overrated.
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 Parties.
Overrated.
Overrated.
Neutral, always down for a good time.
AI.
Overrated.
Neutral.
Overrated.
Mainnet.
Underrated.
Can I try to understand a bit more? Like,
Mainnet.
okay. Overrated.
Overrated.
BTC maxis.
Underrated.
Overrated.
Overrated.
Alignment anons.
Overrated.
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 Okay, that's it. All right, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.